welcome back to another New World video. This time I wanted to bring you my Season 10 tanking guide. This build that I'll be showing you in this video is suitable for pretty much all PvE content in Season 10, but especially endgame stuff like the Gorgon raid, Isle of the Night raid, mutation level 3s, and it's definitely usable in catacombs. I'd probably only use this build, probably like bosses 4 to 6. It's a little bit too tanky for the first couple of bosses. That's normally where I play a bit DPS. But if you want to check me out playing as a tank POV live over on Twitch, feel free to check out my channel. I'll put it in the link down below. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sundays. Every now and again, I stream on a Saturday. I always stream at 5 PM UK times over on the Nissa server on EU. Okay, let's start off with weapon choices. So in Season 10, I am playing with Sword and Shield, but Greatsword mostly. The reason why I've converted over to Greatsword compared to my last tanking guide, which was quite a long time ago, is simply because it's just incredibly easy to tank with a Greatsword. Stupendously easier, even easier than Sword and Shield. Mostly because of the grit advantages you get, which I'll show you in the build. But to show you a Greatsword example of some of the weapon perks I'm currently using, we've got a Trenchant Recovery on there, which is going to be huge. Please make a note of that one. Trenchant Rend, Disdained Infliction, and then I've got a defensive slot on this, so we've got Fortified. I'm still looking for like an overall Bisque Greatsword. For me personally, with the build that I'm going to be running here, I think Trenchant Recovery is like definitely like massively needed in there. I think if we got something like Trenchant Strikes and stuff that, you know, to output our damage even higher, I think that'd be pretty good. So focus on the Greatsword first. This is what we're using at the moment. I'll show you the skill tree for the Greatsword as well, so you know how I'm running here. We don't need to name all of them, because I presume at this point, you know, if you're playing in Season 10, you pretty much know how to tank. If you literally know nothing about tanking whatsoever in New World, I'll link up and show it on screen now, a previous tank guide video that I made a couple of years ago. If you were, it's a bit of a longer video. If you were to chill and watch that video though, you would get all of the basic fundamentals from New World tanking from that video. So yeah, feel free to check that out. But just mentioning some of the key skills here though, obviously using Roar and Rupture here. As long as you hit the mob, you're going to gain 10% Fortify for 7 seconds, which is pretty good. We're going to use that Fortify to obviously help us increase our armor and stay alive. The ability generates 200% threat and has Grit. Now, Grit is vitally important for this build. As you can hear as well, Shockwave applies 10% weaken for 10 seconds on hit as well. So we always want to make sure that we are hitting those mobs. And after a successful hit, we become uninterruptible for 5 seconds. So Grit and uninterruptible are absolutely vital for Greatsword. I'll basically kind of show you why on like a test dummy. I'll also put some footage in later on in the video of exactly how this works. But if you see here, if we hit Rupture here and we hit the actual mob, essentially your skill rotation is just going to be this. You're literally just going to hold onto your left click and you're just going to heavy attack. Every now and again, when you know there's a huge heavy attack coming from a boss, you can use Calamity to do that block. You can take a couple of hits and you'll knock all the mobs down again. And all you want to do in this rotation, essentially, is hit Rupture on cooldown and then just spam your heavy attacks. It's honestly, it's such an incredibly easy build. Depending on how the mobs are like sort of formatted around the front of you, if it's safe to do so, you can put in like a rush like this and then go back into the heavy attacks again. But you just want to be a little bit careful, because when you do that skill, you obviously show your back to the mob. So if you take any hits, it's going to do a lot more damage to you. And you have a small chance, depending on what the mobs are that you're actually fighting or the boss, that sort of boss or mobs follow you as you're doing it and then swing around and hit a little bit more AoE and end up hitting some of the DPS players that are going to be stood on the other side of the mob. So maybe stick it away a little bit from Rush there, but we're definitely going to be hitting Rupture and then just basically spamming the 3. We're going to have Uninterruptible here. We're going to have Grit as well, which we'll mention later on in the build. This is going to stop the mobs from staggering us. And then obviously when we run out of Grit or Interruptible, we can use Calamity to block a few hits, knock all the mobs down, and then go back into Rupture again and spam all 3 heavies. It's a really easy rotation. Now moving over onto the sword. So essentially the way I play this now, I play Greatsword main. The Sword and Shield is literally only there for certain situations in mob fights or boss fights. Obviously, if there's an incredible huge clump of mobs in front of us, I might quickly switch to the Sword and Shield to chuck in a Whirling Blade for some big AoE damage. But what we're looking for really on the sword is obviously gem slots, so we can pop in that Carnelian, obviously. And then we kind of just want to get as much damage output as possible. So here you can see the one I've got at the moment, it does have a defensive slot in, which isn't ideal. But we have Flame Attunement, we have Trenchant Rend, and we have Sundering Stacks. Now, I have some other swords, which I'm trying to collect and you know, get some better ones. Here, for example, we have life stealing, abyssal attunement, end 2. End 2 is definitely going to be a really good perk to have on the sword. We're still looking for Biss here. Obviously, this one as well, Plague Strikes, Frost Attunement, end 2. And I have a further DPS sword, which I can still use for tanking as well if we pop a Cornelian on there. End 2, Flame Attunement, Sunder and Stacks weapon perk. So I'm going to show you 2 sword and shield builds here. This is going to be build number 1. This is if you are, you know, you played tank before in New World, but maybe not for a little while. Maybe that's why you're watching this guide in the first place. And this is like the starter sword and shield build I would currently use here. As you can see all of our skills we're using. You can check this out in game. I don't want to spend a massive long video by describing every single individual perk. Some of the key ones though are Final Blow. Every time you use the third attack in your light attack chain, you'll gain more threat. You definitely want that. Defender's Resolve is going to be the big skill you use to AoE taunt. Going to give you a bit of grit as well. Whirling Blade is our big AoE attack, which we're going to apply hopefully lots of damage, and we're going to be in heavy equip load there, so we'll be applying 16% weaken, which is obviously very important. But overall, the only thing I'm going to say more importantly here in sword and shield tanking is, please guys, do not play defensive formation, please. Okay, we're not doing that. All right. Leadership tanking has been a thing now in UL for probably at least 2.5 to 3 years. While holding a sword, granted power to all group members, increasing their damage by 10%. So this is in the empowerment pool. So you're basically just permanently buffing everybody in your group. Only things to note here, you have to have the sword and shield sheathed like this. So if you are ever greatsword main like I am, you're not actually applying that empower. So just bear that in mind. And if you're in a raid group, so 2 groups of 5, you're only going to be empowering the people in your group of 5. So bear that in mind. So in some ideal situations, if you think you're never going to switch to sword and shield and you're going to be always greatsword, you would probably run a sword and, if we're talking raids here, you probably run a sword and shield leadership in your group and the sword and shield leadership in the second group, and then that way everyone's getting the empower. If you can't get that many, you would put the sword and shield leadership DPS player in the second group, and then you would momentarily every now and again pop out your sword and shield to give everybody empower. And then this is the build I would like you all to play, and this is what I play once you're a little bit more comfortable with using sword and shield if you haven't played the game in a while or it's your first time in tanking. So some of the changes here, we have dropped Shield Rush. Now, like I said, Shield Rush is quite useful for tanking. Do you know what I mean? It will give you threat. Obviously, you can get the weapon perk called Fortifying Shield Rush to give you more defense and more armor. You can also apply Weaken. So there is some benefits here, and I wouldn't sort of, mock any tank who doesn't take Upheaval and does take Shield Rush. In some occasions, I will take this. But if we're going to start progressing a little bit more in our tanking and start doing a bit more output damage, once you're comfortable, really, I think this is probably the best build to go. We don't need the additional fortifies over here because we're barely going to be using our sword and shield, and we're definitely not going to be using the sword and shield to block at all, at least not by standing still and blocking. I leave this one in here. When you block an attack, gain a stack of 3% power. There are minor occasions when you've got your sword and shield out, you're applying the empower from leadership to everybody else in your group. And you just know there's an attack coming, maybe from Gorgon Raid, for example. You know an attack's coming, you want to do a quick block, and then you can just go back into doing your light attack chain. That's why I'll leave this one here. You can gain a little bit of an empower. But overall, as you can see here, this is the build I use. The reason why we bring Upheaval in there is, obviously, we get grit on that, which means we don't get knocked over whilst we're doing it. And then down here, the cooldown. So essentially, if we are going sword and shield, and we're using a combination something on the lines of, I would probably go... Depending if you need to use your AoE taunt, you'd probably use that first. You'd go one heavy attack to give you the empower, Whirling Blade, and then Upheaval, and then that one. We would follow that kind of like rotation until we obviously get our skills down into rotation again. That for me is like the best way to use sword and shield. You're really only using it in raids, in my opinion, because we're going to be going greatsword main. You're only going to be using your sword and shield if you need the additional AoE taunt, if there are a ton of mobs in front of you, and then you want to apply Whirling Blade, or if it's an occasion where, for example, let's say the first boss in the new Isle of Night raid, it has moments when after you shoot it with the Ballista, that Jester boss will kind of like just stay still, and then you can just do maximum DPS. At that point, I would get rid of my greatsword. I'd go into sword and shield. You're going to empower everybody on your little 5-man team. You're going to do as much damage as you possibly can, and just literally spam all of your skills, and you're making sure you're doing your 3 light attack chain with the sword and shield, which is very, very key. If we look over onto Whirling Blade as well here, so we're going to get cooldowns as well. So that's why I would only use Whirling Blade normally if we're going to be hitting multiple mobs, or for spamming that as well. And then obviously here as well, when we're in the heavy load, which I'll speak about in a moment, you are going to inflict all of those mobs with 16% weaken, which means they're going to be doing less damage to you and your team. So that's kind of like the rotation. I would, like I said, I would just use Defender Resolve if you need that, and then I'd go straight back to Greatsword if you don't need to be using your Sword and Shield. But the moment when you want to up the DPS for you and your group into Sword and Shield, big heavy attack to gain that Empower, up Evil to do even more attack there, and just keep spamming like that, and spam our Worm and Blade as well. We'll be inflicting Rends, Weakens, Empower for the team. It's not a bad little combination. A quick note as well, I will mention the shield types later on with jewelry, and I'll tell you why. Last thing to note about this build as well, like I said, I choose to play Greatsword and Sword and Shield. If your group does actually already have 2 Sword and Shield DPS, so 1 in each group, the option then would be to go for Power Stone. Now, Power Stone is the flail artifact, and it is really, really good defensively wise. It puts out like a ton of weakens. Now, what we find in the groups that we play with, one of our healers plays Power Stone. Therefore, there's not really much point in me playing Power Stone at all. That's why I stick to this build at the moment with Sword and Shield and Greatsword. But Power Stone, which I'm not going to talk about too much because that's not in the build I use, Power Stone is definitely your other option. Right, now let's talk about the armor. Now, obviously, we're going to be playing in heavy at the moment. Eventually, at some point, you know, when we're playing mutations and catacombs, we will be dropping down to medium tanking in the future. But this is still early days season 10. So we do want that trade-off of being safe, but we also want to do as much damage as possible as well. So I'm going to show you here. So overall, we're in heavy. Now, some key perks that you want to aim for in your build. Enchanted Ward, that can stack up to 5 times. So we're going to call them, we'll call them properly as well. So Enchanted Ward 2 can stack up to 5 times. Grit Ward 2 can stack up to 5 times. Leeching can stack up to 5 times. Divine can also stack up to 5. And Prolonged Favor can also stack up to 5 as well. Now, in my build here, I have a lot of these at 5, some of them at 4, some of them at 3. Obviously, we're building up our gear here in Season 10. But if I can show you some examples here. Now, I actually crafted quite a lot of my gear. I got a little bit lucky. There's a patch in early in Season 10 which stopped you from crafting gear where you could lock in the gem slot. At the moment, if you craft your own gear using armor matrices in the Forge, you can't lock in gem slot anymore. So that's a little bit useless. I managed to, and here's some of the gear that I've come out with now. The bottom perk was locked in. We couldn't really control that. And obviously gem slot. So we have here defensive slot, defensive slot, defensive slot. Oh, sorry, offensive slot is leeching. I do apologize. And then obviously defensive slot, defensive slot. So here, as you can see in my overall build, we are stacking 5 Enchanted Ward, which is going to give us 10% reduced damage. Now in PvE, if you look at all the guys who know the coding in the back end of New World, most, if not all attacks will fall under this Enchanted Ward, so that means that'll be really, really viable. On this build with the Greatsword, we're going to be stacking as much grit as we possibly can, and we'll talk about grit a little bit more as well in the build, so that's why I've gone with Grit Ward. The strike conditioning is just bang, you know, just average. I'll show you the rest of the gear before we go into the artifact though. So heavy gloves here, we got the Leeching 2 in there, Grit Ward, Enchanted Ward, Frost conditioning was locked in. We're going to ignore that perk and just pretend it's not there. What I would say about conditioning is, I see a lot of people stacking like 3 times conditionings in the individual armor, thinking it's good. If you really read it though, it's not. Especially not for, say, DPS players and healers, because it only triggers after you take that first hit. So let's say if I take a big strike damage, now as a tank, I can probably handle that hit. And then therefore, if I take a second and a third and a fourth hit, for example, yeah, that strike condition will come in and reduce the damage. But any DPS players out there and healers looking at conditioning on your gear, just bear that in mind. You'll probably be dead before you even take the second hit, especially in raids and in mutations. So yeah, over on the gloves, we ignore the frost conditioning. And coming down here now, here's some of the really good perks that I like as well, which I think we're going to mention in a moment, because we've got some perks that stack up to 5, and there's some perks that only stack up to 1. So Prolonged Favor is a really good perk that I like. I like this for DPS, and I like this for tanks, to be honest. So any increase the duration of limited duration buffs on self by 9.3%. That is huge. So that's like empowers, and that's like fortify. Now in this build, we'll be doing self fortify. So making that fortify last longer on us, increasing our armor value, is going to be really, really vital to staying alive. Obviously, when we give ourselves empower as well, so we do more damage, so then we do more leeching, that'll be really good. And this build is focused around leeching quite heavily, as you'll see. It's quite defensive, but also we're going to try and put out as much damage as possible where we can. And for that, if we can have Prolonged Favor, this is all going to sort of like synergize and work together. Lifestealer's Draft, all hits gain 14% lifesteal, and the power of lifesteal is increased by 14% as long as you have not used a survival potion in the last 13 seconds. So your health potions, your regen potions. Now in general, the last case scenario for me, I will not use a health pot or a regen pot. It's literally last case scenario. And grit ward pots, to be honest, I'll only ever really use those if I have to on my sword and shield. But then in general, if I ever think I need my grit again, I will go back to greatsword. Going down to the boots here, that's where you can see we've stacked prolonged favor. The locked in perk of slash condition we just kind of ignore. Now going back to my artifact of choice, so there are some other options you could use. You could use the unmoved boots. Now these are pretty good. And if you look at that top perk there, unmovable, you cannot be displaced when taking a hit. Reflect void damage back at the target equal to 16% of your weapon damage. So that's pretty cool, not gonna lie. Then that'll give you an offensive slot, defensive slot, gem slot, which is not too bad. I've kind of sort of move away to these. I don't know what it is. I just find like in games sometimes where it just literally does not help me out whatsoever. That's what I personally find. And then also survivability on void darkplate is a lot higher because of that extra 20% increased armor. That's just going to make you so insane. And then if you buff up all your fortifies as well, honestly guys, like if you're looking just for like survivability tank, you know what I mean, where you can even reduce the amount of heals that you're getting because of leeching, that we'll talk about in a minute, this to me is the best right now. Also, what I found as well is the update to this where it says, and you take 8% increased block damage. I don't really block, I'll be honest. I know it can count as a block when you do the greatsword 3 heavy attacks in a row, but I'm not seeing any increased damage being taken whatsoever. I don't know if this only actually works if you're just you got your shield out, you're physically blocking, and then you're taking that little bit more damage. I can't seem to find exactly how this perk works. But basically using this, I'm not seeing myself take any more damage whatsoever. So we talked about what perks and to stack on your gear. You want to be aiming, like I said, for 5 enchanted ward, 5 grit ward, as close to 5 leeching and 5 divine as you can possibly get. And obviously as much prolonged favor as you can possibly get as well. That's really, really going to help. Now, in terms of the perks that only stack once, the ones that you want to look for is keenly fortified. This is going to be really nice. So basically, every time you do a crit hit on a mob, which sure, you're going to crit less than a DPS because DPS players will be hitting the mobs in the back. You'll be hitting them in the front as you're face up tanking, but you will still crit quite regularly. Every several hits you'll crit, which means you're going to give yourself more fortify. And then with the prolonged favor, that's going to last even longer. So we definitely want to be stacking in keenly fortified. I've also added in, I wanted to show you this, one of these pieces last, but I've also added in keenly empowered here, as you can see on my shield. So essentially, if we got the sword and shield out, if we were to obviously crit again, we're going to give ourselves that extra empower. And don't forget, with the leeching, the more damage you do, the more health you will get back from leeching. So yes, we want to be fortified, we want to be heavy armor, we want to be strong, but we also want to output our damage as much as possible where we can. So therefore our leeching gets increased. That's the kind of aim and sort of where I'm going with this build. Now, moving over to jewelry. So the reason why I wanted to bring the shield in with jewelry is basically the biggest reason is you see the way we have protections on our amulet. That's probably the most important thing you're looking for in amulet. So we have strike protection here. So currently in season 10, I presume it was designed this way. You can't stack your protections. So you can get many shields like this crazy one over here. Thrust, strike, flame, light. There's many shields like this in the game. But if you used to have strike protection on your shield and a strike amulet, strike protection, you wouldn't get both of those. So what you want to do as a tank here, you want to mix up your protections. But what I found is, unless you're playing mutations or catacombs, where you do want a shield like this one on screen now, because it's just going to give you protection from all areas. Which is really nice. If you're focusing on a specific like boss in the new raid or the old raid and you know exactly what damage they do, I would switch out your amulet every time. So I would just go for a strike based amulet, thrust based amulet, slash bit, etc. Right? You would swap that on depending on the boss that you're coming up against. Mutations, you would obviously put the elemental type of that's why we keep one of each here. So we've got like the void protection, frost protection, you get that right now. So that's why I paired shield in this part of the video with the jewelry, because you don't want to stack these two the same. So I've actually gone a little bit different for my shield for now, and I've gone with 2 defensive slots and 1 offensive slot. This is going to boost my numbers up here, as you can see in the stack. So leeching I can now get to 4 out of 5. Divine we can now get up to 3 out of 5, and then I've slotted in the keenly empowered. So when we got the sword and shield out, if we do crit, we empower ourselves even more. We should be hitting empowerment cap, and then therefore as sword and shield be doing as much damage as possible, which is the point. Now, what I'll mention about the ring here is, and later on in the video I will mention some goal items. So these are not all absolute perfect bis end game. We're still looking for those. We're 2 weeks into season 10, but these are absolutely usable. Just so you're 100% clear as well, guys, I've tanked the full Gorgon raid in season 10, no problems. We've tanked the first boss in the Isle of the Night raid. Literally zero problems. Sometimes I'm there sipping a drink with one hand and just holding left click to, you know what I mean, to do the great sword swings. It's literally that easy. We will get further in that raid as well if you want to check us out on Twitch. But our group is quite new to doing raids, so we're not quite progressing at the moment. And then, so yeah, going into Julie here, looking at this one, I've dropped, and I think I fell foul that everyone else did. Blood Drinker got massively overhyped in my opinion for season 10 because of catacombs and the survivability and maybe not playing with healers. All I'm going to say is when I use Blood Drinker, and this was exactly the same as what it was when I first used Blood Drinker when it first came out, it just reduces your damage too much. And I know with the change to it in season 10, you can reduce that damage by 5% if you think about it in that way. To me, it's just my opinion. It's my personal opinion. I don't think it's good enough anymore because I think tanks now should be focused on doing more output damage rather than just being 100% defensible. I would not, you know, digress. I don't want to digress too much, but I wouldn't go crazy if somebody was using this as a tank in catacombs. I think that's okay. When it comes to the raids and mutation level 3s and stuff like that, I just think this is dropped, and I think we should be looking for more output damage. So like that's why I got the slash damage ring here. Gambled energies on this one as well, and acutely empowered, just give us that little bit more damage. Leeching though, we're keeping on. Obviously, we want to do as much leeching and survivability in this build. So that's why I've moved over to Privateer's Heirloom. If you want to know where to get this one specifically, you can check on your database or your buddy, but you get it from the Barnacles Expedition. Unless you've got Barnacles Mutation Materia, then you can go to the Gypsum Kiln and just roll one. If you get one with these exact perks here, perfect, level it up to 800. Or if you don't get leeching on there, you can roll it with a jewelry matrix if you wish. Moving on to earring. So we do need to discuss this. As you can see, I got some defensive slots on there, and I don't have gem slot. I will explain why. One, quickly going into mutations. So far, I barely used that many gem slots in M3s. I literally used 3 or 4 gem slots maximum of the mutation type. In the raid, obviously, there's a lot of physical damage in there. That's why I'm stacked with onyxes at the moment. And we'll speak about gems a little bit more in a minute. You're looking at this and you're thinking, Liam, you're talking about tanking here. Why the hell have you got Beloved on there? So, first of all, if you actually read the 2 perks, so Despised, generate 232% more threat. Let's just start there. Now, Beloved, you generate 42% less threat. So, obviously, the Despised is way outnumbering the Beloved. I have had I want to clarify this. I've had 0 issues with keeping or maintaining or getting aggro as a tank in Season 10 using this earring, okay? 0. The only time I ever don't have aggro straight away is if a bunch of DPS players pre-fire at a boss before I even get a chance to swing or do a taunt. Okay, sure, they steal aggro for all of about 2 seconds. But obviously, if I get first hit in there, the aggro is mine. It ain't leaving, okay? Now, the reason why I want to be stacking this up, furthermore, going back to our original point, if we want to do more output damage as a tank, which will also help our leeching. If you look at the second part of Despised and Beloved, this apparently is not currently working in the game. I have tested this as well, and I actually couldn't get a damage increase. So essentially what it's saying is, so Despised and Beloved deal 6.5% more base damage to taunted foes. And then with Beloved, it is deal 8.4% more damage to taunted foes. It's like a double damage buff. But apparently it's not working in game right now. I'm keeping hold of this earring for now, because if they do fix that and patch it soon, this is going to be a pretty decent damage increase. And essentially, all you've got to do is make sure that you have a taunt active on the mob or on the boss, which will be obviously like your Defender's Resolve or your Calamity. That will apply a taunt. It'll last several seconds, and during those several seconds, you will do more damage. Now, also, if all the DPS and healers stack this as well, they'll also be doing a ton more damage. So the threat part of it definitely does seem to be working right now. I'm not losing aggro with the Beloved, but we're just not dealing that extra damage, but it is something to work on. Now, Refreshing Move and Refreshment are 2 other perks that are absolutely, you need to get them in there, especially Refreshment. I think it's 10% once you get it to 800 gear score, which is going to be absolutely vital. So make sure you get that in there. Now, quickly speaking about gems, like we have mentioned. So for the Isle of the Night raid, I'm literally running like this at the minute. I've not even had to stack extra strike damage for the first boss, or strike resistance, should we say. I've left in one void gem here for when we were doing void mutations last week. So in mutations, I literally run like this. And I would possibly put, for mutation level 3, I'd possibly put 1 more of whatever the mutation is. So if it's void week, you know, nature week, whatever. M3, I'm currently running 3 gems and 1 protection, you know, the element that it is that week. And I've had 0 issues in M3s. I will admit, the DPS players are getting absolutely, you know, destroyed at the minute. If you're playing light DPS or light healer, it seems way harder for them, and that's even when they've stacked fully up with whatever the gems are that week. So me personally, going into the raid, I'm literally just using strike amulet with strike protection. All of the rest are just onyx. Now I can change these here and there. If I'm making a perfect build, then for mutations, we might sneak 1 or 2 more gems in there. I've just not needed them yet. And then obviously, depending on what boss we're fighting in the Isle of the Night raid or Gorgon raid, we might swap 1 or 2. But for Gorgon raid, I literally just swapped to a slash amulet for the second boss, and then I swapped for a nature, probably this one, nature amulet for the final boss. And it's literally that simple. That's all I do. I'm so survivable at the minute. It's crazy. One thing I forgot to mention earlier on in the video, which I probably should have. So going into like the attribute split. Yeah, going into the attribute split again. Where we said, like, obviously, if you're a little bit slightly more, newer to the tanking, I would definitely start off with 350 constitution and then as much strength as you can possibly pack in there. Greatsword does stack from both strength and dexterity. I have done some testing with just pure DPS damage from Greatsword, and I'm pretty sure 350 dex and then as much strength as you could get, which obviously on a DPS play might be like 200 strength maybe, is the biggest damage. But what I found here is to start off like this is where we're at. Now, I've been playing the new Isle of Night raid, for example, spamming the first boss trying to get the jewelry. I'm now down to 250 con, and then as much strength as I can possibly get. Now, what we also run as well is, we can run here 25 dex, and I'll show you why. Making sure that's correct, yeah. So, we'll spam as much strength as we possibly can. Be ideal if we had slightly better food. I think we've got 44 food on at the moment. And this is how I'm currently running Isle of Night raid, 250 constitution. And I'll be honest, I am 1 or 2 runs away from just going down to 200 and then obviously hitting 300 strength and a little bit more dex. The reason why I'm running this is I'm just so survivable right now. I've shown you all my armor already. I've shown you how we're buffing it up, all the fortifying there, self-fortifying. We'll also be getting fortifying from, like, Sacred Ground and all this kind of stuff. If you're fully weakening the mobs, and if you're, you're stacking your team up pretty well, this to me is just so survivable. It's insane. Because obviously, don't forget, on that Greatsword, we are doing a ton of the trench and recovery, all of our leeching. We're doing quite a bit of damage, and we're just healing ourselves so quickly. And all the fortify and the heavy, honestly, insane build right now in terms of easy to play. So easy to play Greatsword. By the way, I'm not making this build to show you like some incredible build. Oh my god, look at this 500 IQ big brain. Bro, this is so easy to play. If you want to play tank in New World, in my opinion, this is how you should be playing. Like I said, start off at 350 con, and then once you start doing a couple of harder runs, some mutations, level 3s, and then you're doing the raid, start to drop your con, and overall, what this is going to do is bigger output damage, which obviously we've mentioned it 500 times already. It's going to give you more leeching, which is going to make you more sustainable. But bigger output damage is going to help your team. The more damage you're doing as the tank, obviously the more threat you're going to be generating, so you're definitely not losing any mobs whatsoever in terms of aggro, but you're going to be killing the mobs faster. The quicker you kill the mobs and the bosses in this game, normally like the less sort of like animations they have, and the less skills they do, and the less phases, and therefore you actually help out the entire team by doing more damage. So aim for something like this. Obviously we can stack up there. We don't really gain too much if we hit the 300 strength perk, whereas the reason why I go this minimum of 25 is plus critical hit chance, and like we said before, we have keenly fortified and keenly empowered in our build, which gives us that little bit more of a chance to obviously crit, which is going to fortify us more and empower us more. Last thing I'll mention about gems, sorry that this video is slightly unorganized, I'm making this on the fly. Last thing I'll mention about gems here is once you're fully comfortable and you've got yourself what you think is a Bis Greatsword or a Bis Sword, you can then move on from Carnelians and put a Carnelian Rune Glass in there. And then the tick damage from the Carnelian Rune Glass will actually help your Heart Rune basically regenerate faster. And then moving on to Heart Runes, this is where you can have a play around. Now, if you are a brand new tank, sure, you can use one of these brutal Heart Runes of stone form. This one will give you more Fortify, for example. I wouldn't use Exploding one if you're a new tank, though. This one gives you just overall more Fortify. And then there's a healing one as well, which is probably on a set somewhere. I would start off with one of these. But I would very, very quickly move on to something a bit more useful to the team. So, for example, here you could use the Rendon and Enfeebling Vines. This one is very, very good. All of the mobs in that area, or the boss, you're going to inflict weaken, so they do less damage, and you're going to inflict Rend, which means you and all your teammates do more damage. In certain situations, you might want to use the Cleansing Storm, depending on, in certain mutations, you might want to use that. So have a look at that one as well. That'll also inflict weaken. So keep an eye out. And then obviously this new one, I'm having a little play around with the new one. I don't think it actually does that much damage. But as a tank, it's very, very fun to clump all of the mobs right at your front door. Hit them with like this and then rush. Use your relentless rush. You've just got all the mobs in front of you. And you're just constantly doing damage. It's not like an absolute ton of damage. But I do like using it. It's a bit of fun at the minute. If we were min-maxing, we'd probably move away from this and move maybe back towards vines, for example. But yeah, that's the heart runes that I would use. Stone form to start off with and then move into the more aggressive ones eventually. Then let's talk about consumables as well. So you've got your standard consumables. Again, we do have Lifestealer's Drought like we talked about here, so we don't actually want to be using these. But on your hotbar, you can have your standard health potions, regen potions. If you think you're going to take a huge amount of elemental damage in the next couple of seconds, you can use some gemstone dust. For physical damage, again, maybe like Gorgon first boss, for example, when he does the big head stomp. If you think you're in a bit of an awkward situation and need to, reduce some damage in the next few seconds, you can use some like Oak Flesh Balm. And then Grit Ward potions will be good, especially when you're in Sword and Shield and you think you're getting slapped about with the stagger from PvE mobs. Yeah, you can have a Grit Ward potion available, so mix and match them around on here. Always, tanks, listen, please, again, it's all about output damage now. If you're in a big raid, or maybe not M3, maybe craft yourself some slightly cheaper ones because you're going to be doing tons and tons of M3s. But in raids, endgame raids, make sure you're using powerful honing stones. Depending on what the mobs are that you're coming up against. So it's Lost, for example, in the new raid. Make sure you're using your Lost Ward potions. And again, for output damage, make sure you're using your your coatings as well. So like obviously Lost coatings and Grave coatings. Depending on which mobs you're coming up against, make sure you use those. Coming down here as well, Desert Sunrise, always useful. And then just use the highest amount of attribute food that you possibly can. Constitution and Strength tend to be more expensive on the markets. Just keep an eye out on those. But yeah, try and use the 44 or the 48 buff foods. There's a bug in the game at the minute. If you've got the winter foods from a couple of years ago, they actually go all the way to 51 attributes. So if you've got any of those left, feel free to use those. And then some gear here I want to talk about to aim for. Like I said, my set isn't actually BIS right now. If I hover over some attributes here, my set is actually pretty goddamn, like I'm not struggling in any of this content like we've been talking about, but there are some pieces of gear that we want to aim for. Now again, if you want to look at these a bit more in depth, feel free. I'll put some screenshots up on the video as well. But some of the gear I'm currently aiming for to add to this build to make it even better, some of these like infix perks as well, and some of them like set bonus gear. So we're looking for Unstoppable to add to our gear. So this one, you gain grit on melee heavy attacks or the light attack startup. Take 5% increased base damage when you have grit. So don't forget, we've got our life stealing, we've got our fortify for that. So that 5% increased base damage that you receive is basically nothing, but it's going to give you grit all the time. And then obviously, whilst we have grit, here comes back into our grit ward. That comes back into the build. Insurmountable set as well. So obviously, if you've got like 2 times the set or in 4 times the set, have a look at that. This is looking really, really good. I'll put some of the stats up on the screen. I'm going to try and add bits and bobs into this build as and when I can. Insurmountable earring as well. So it looks like all of this set basically comes from the PvP reward track, which is really frustrating. I don't play PvP, so I'm going to have to. Another one to add, relentless second wind, like the ring, for example, is an infix drop here. While exhausted, gain uninterruptible. Usefully, if you mess up on your rotations, when you're fighting a ton of mobs and you end up getting like staggered, will definitely help, because obviously when you are exhausted, then you've got uninterruptible, which means you can get back into your rotation, drop a rupture, and just get back into it. Tenacity critical. It looks like a good one to add as well. So this will give you crit chance increased by 10% while grit is active. This will help you hit the keenly fortified and the keenly empowered more often in the build. Tenacity rebound seems decent. So enemies receive 5% damage when they hit you with a melee attack and you have grit. Again, the key fundamentals of this build are fortify, grit, leeching, you know what I mean? So all of this is just coming together, and I think that's why it's like a good synergy. And then the last one I want to be aiming for, is tenacity recovery. So this is incoming heals increased by 10% again, whilst you have grit. Now a lot of these are going to be like sort of best in slot pieces, going to be quite hard to farm for, or unless you get incredibly lucky. So there's some of the gear that I want to add to this. And then the last thing I want to mention here is just some key little things about tanking. I'll show you an example on a dummy here, and then I'll try and put some clips over the top of me speaking as well at the same time. I'll go and try and record some of this video. So something that I call north-south tanking. So let's say you and all of your teammates are here. You're running in at this mob here, and everybody else is behind you. I see tanks do this all the time in New World, and it frustrates the life out of me. they will run up to a mob in the same direction and they'll start hitting the mob and then just stand still. And this absolutely frustrates me. That means that all of your DPS players who are behind you, picture a big mob here, obviously, will have to run around to the back of the mob to then start doing all their big damage and crits in the back. This does two things. It wastes time for the DPS having to do all of this running. So all of this time it takes to run behind the mob is no damage or less damage. And then also, depending on what this mob is, this boss or whatever it could be, if your DPS players run a little bit too close, or it's a huge, like a brute mob, they could be doing AoE damage, and then your DPS players could be getting hit in this sort of motion here before they even get back. It's such a waste of time. Please, all tanks, please do this. If I play with another tank and I see them do this, I'm like, oh, this guy or girl, they got it, they know. When you approach the mob, hit through them essentially, and you go to their back. Okay, so you're on like the north side, if you like, and all of the players that are your DPS or your healers, they will be on this side and they'll be instantly here to attack. So if you picture it here, I'll try and put some footage over if I possibly can. If I'm now the DPS player, my tanks run to the other side, I run in a straight line and I just start hitting, and I have no chance of taking any damage whatsoever unless it's like big sweep attacks. But it speeds up the DPS. It's safer for the DPS players and the healers getting round to the back of those mobs. So as the tank, approach whatever the mob is, get on the other side of the mob and start attacking them from the back so the mob turns towards you. I call it north-south tanking. I don't mean north-south as in the compass at the top. I'm talking about if you're facing forward, you're north, you run to the other side, and all your DPS players and healers are on this side, and it's so much easier. That to me is a basic thing, but so many tanks do not do it in New World. It is crazy. Another thing, obviously, try and stay in one direction as a tank. So don't be doing this, and then this, and then this, and then attacking from this direction, because every time the mobs face you, at some point they'll be swinging around and they'll be hitting all of your DPS and melee players and any close healers with Void Blade, for example. So try your best to stay in one direction. Try and literally, like, if you pop, I know you will get a bit of stagger every now and again. It'll happen. Of course, you'll move over here and you'll get jumped here, but just try and stay in one direction. It makes it so much easier for the DPS players. They don't take any damage and they can focus on dealing damage. Another little tip is as well, try and speak with your group. Once the despised and the beloved is fixed, try and get all of your team, the healers, the DPS, everybody, to all have at least beloved, at least, because then every time you taunt, they're going to be doing more damage. And then eventually, if it works out right and they fix both despised and beloved, everybody in your party should be able to run despised and beloved. You'll always keep the aggro, and everyone else will deal more damage. And then a final little tip is never block with the greatsword. So with sword and shield, yeah, sure, you can have a little block, you know, if there's mobs hitting you, but never block with the greatsword. The block actually comes as you're doing your attacks like this. There's actually block built in. Here it is. So Path of Defiance. So if you read here, guard point, block incoming attacks while charging heavy attacks. So while you're literally in the animation of that, you'll be blocking. So you don't have to actually block. And then obviously, if you know you're going to take a huge hit from like a big brute mob, for example, that is when you can use your calamity. And also when you group up all the mobs for the first time, let's say there's several mobs here, you group them all up, you can use your calamity, that'll taunt them all, they're all in on you, then you'll swipe them all down with that final attack. You can chuck in your rupture then, and then just go to town. I'll try and put some clips over above so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, so it's not just on dummies. But yeah, there you go. Guys, hopefully you like my guide. I've not made a tanking video for like 2 or 3 years, so hopefully you like this one. I don't want to make it too long. I'll try and snip it up where I can. And I'll put some timestamps down below for all the different sections in case you want to go back and read and any little sections in there. If you enjoyed this video or you found it helpful, let me know in the comment section down below. I would massively appreciate a subscription as well if you like the videos. We are close to 5,000 subs now, so that would be great. Anything you think I've missed or anything you think you actually have tried, you think, maybe just swap this point to that, for example, again, comment section down below. I'm not saying this is the absolute, perfect BIS tanking guide, but listen, I'm playing all the endgame content at the moment at the hardest difficulties and having close to 0 issues, so I think this guide hopefully will do you instead. And obviously, if you're fairly new to tanking, hopefully it helps you in some way. And yeah, guys, if you appreciate it, if you like the video, I'd appreciate all the YouTube stuff. And yeah, check me out over on Twitch, links down below. Appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.